Thank you, President Quiche, Board of Trustees, esteemed members of the faculty, proud parents and family, loyal friends, and most importantly, congratulations, Agnes Scott Class of 2014. It means so much for me to be here. 17 years ago at Smith, I sat in a similar seat that you do today. And 17 years ago, I fell asleep during my commencement speech. I barely remember who spoke and what she said. And since the next 30 minutes will hopefully go by pretty quickly, I want you to take a moment and take a look around, find your best friends, and remember that you are sharing this momentous day with them. Giving a commencement speech is a huge responsibility, especially when the graduating class thought that Ellen DeGeneres was going to be their commencement speaker. I understand your disappointment. I too would have loved to have Ellen speak here today. She is funnier, cuter, and definitely a better dancer than I am. She is a snazzier dresser, but please don't judge me by my outfit today. I'm in my coaching gear, having squeezed in the speech between 2 soccer games. The kids that I teach and coach were surprised that I was giving a commencement speech, saying, "Isn't that for presidents and people like Oprah?" There's nothing like a group of teenagers putting you in your place. I have racked my brain trying to figure out what to tell you. Spent countless hours in the shower, car, and practice going over what I wish I'd heard at my graduation. So in order to prevent you from falling asleep like I did 17 years ago, I'm going to share a few stories with you that have shaped my life, and hopefully you'll be able to recall one of them. I grew up as the oldest of 4 children in a Muslim household in Amman, Jordan. As a child, I was very well off and privileged. Everything was handed to me. I lived in a house with maids, chauffeurs, nannies, and cooks. We had all this because both of my grandfathers were self-made millionaires, and my family was full of workaholics. My grandparents and parents valued hard work and self-reliance, but I think as the 2nd and 3rd generations came up, we started taking everything for granted, behaving with a sense of entitlement that is very prevalent today. My grandfather once made a comment that the children of millionaires never work as hard as their parents, and he was worried about what would happen to his grandchildren. I have some great memories of my grandmother, a woman who inspired me throughout her life and continues to do so from heaven today. I used to play a game with her, usually close to birthdays and other holidays. My grandmother would ask me, if you had one wish in the world, what would it be? And I would always have an answer. I never had to stop and think about it. It would usually be the coolest bicycle or a new soccer ball or the latest sneakers. I would then ask her the same question. Her answer was always the same. I wish that everyone in the world would have clean drinking water. I would tell her that everyone has drinking water, and that was not a good thing to wish for. Didn't she want a new car or perhaps a pool? Still, her response remained unchanged. She didn't need those things, but people needed clean drinking water. I'd roll my eyes at her and wonder why she would waste a wish on something like that. It wasn't until I was 16 and I traveled with my family to Thailand on a summer vacation. One day, my father took us out on a Rice Barrage River cruise, which was advertised as seeing Thai life up close and personal. On that cruise, we got to see the houses on stilts while we enjoyed tropical fruits and unlimited cold drinks. But we also got to see kids brushing their teeth in the same filthy water that families wash their clothes in. People on the boat were saying, "This is so sad, this is so depressing, maybe we should send some food over." When the cruise ended 45 minutes later, I grew nauseous at the sight of humans like me and you drinking that dirty water. Still, I left the boat to go back to our 5-star hotel and prepare for dinner. It was that experience that made me realize the power of my grandmother's simple wish. Not everyone had clean drinking water. But I did nothing. I went back to my fortunate life and enjoyed the rest of my vacation, blocking out any images that would make me question my privilege. Fast forward to 1997, the year I graduated from college. I had made the decision to stay in the United States, to make a life of my own instead of going home to Jordan and live the life that was carved out for me. Perhaps part of it was me being naive, and part of it thinking that I could do it all on my own, just like my grandparents did, that I didn't need everything handed to me. My parents were not happy with my decision and made it very clear that if this was my choice, I would have to do it on my own without any financial support from them. That was the first time that I hit rock bottom. The weeks and sometimes months following graduation are hard for a lot of people, especially those who don't know exactly what they're going to do next. For me, this was compounded by suddenly not having the emotional or financial support of my family. I was overwhelmed and depressed. I remember my best friend dragging me out of bed saying, "It's time to get up. You can't lay around like this for the rest of your life." For the next few years, I had no direction in my life. I jumped around from job to job, moving from Boston to Highlands, North Carolina, and eventually to Atlanta. I applied to law school, but then decided that I didn't want to go. I freelanced doing web and graphic design, and then I opened up a cafe. And every time I spoke to my parents, and sometimes my friends, they would ask, "Is this what you're doing with your degree?" And I didn't have an answer for them. I'd get depressed when my alumni quarterly came, and I would read about the great things my classmates were doing. And I too would wonder, am I doing what I'm supposed to do with my life? As one friend after another found their ways to jobs, grad schools, and other society-approved steps towards success, I sunk deeper into my self-doubting state. I became a walking contradiction. I was afraid of failure. What if I never amounted to anything? Yet terrified of success, since the only definition of success I knew was status and financial wealth. I didn't want the pursuit of financial security and prosperity to define my choices. And I'm still grateful that I had that little bit of clarity back then, even if it didn't make things easier at the time. I was lost, I had no direction, and I felt no purpose. There was one bright spot. I enjoyed coaching a girls' soccer team. But over time, that too felt meaningless. After coaching them for 4 years, I knew I had taken them as far as I could as a coach. The game and the environment had become overly competitive, with pushy parents demanding more wins. One parent confronted me after a loss, saying that I shouldn't have played one of the weaker players, and we were here to win, and some players should stay on the bench. I longed to remember the purity of the game that I loved so much as a child. Then one day on a drive I had made many times to Clarkston, Georgia, to a Middle Eastern grocery store that I frequent, I made a wrong turn into an apartment complex, and I saw some kids playing soccer. They were outside their apartments in the parking lot, playing barefoot with rocks set up as goals and arguing over goals. I watched these kids play for about an hour. By the end, I was smiling. These kids reminded me of home. They reminded me of the way I played soccer in the streets of Jordan with my cousins. I also realized they were all refugees from war-torn nations, all trying to assimilate and make a life for themselves in this country. I decided I wanted to play with them, so I came out later in the week armed with a ball. One of the boys ran up to me and asked if he could use the ball because it was in better condition than the one they had. I asked to play in return. The 5 boys were skeptical about letting me, a woman, and a stranger join their game, so they got in a huddle, and finally one of them came up and said, "Okay, you're on their team." Of course, I got the chubby kid and the really small one. But it didn't matter. I hadn't had that much fun in a long time. We argued about goals, we played barefoot, and we sweated. And we played for over an hour. I played with the boys a few more times over the next few weeks. I gradually won them over. According to them, girls don't know how to play soccer. But obviously I did. I asked them if they'd ever played on a team, and they said no, but that they would love to. Well, the 6 of us were not enough for a team. So we drove around the neighborhood trying to find more players. And anytime we'd find a kid that was about the right size, we would show them the soccer ball and tell them to show up at 5 o'clock. I was so excited about this team. During the first week, I had the kids that came out scrimmage while I watched and coached from the sidelines. During the scrimmage, I noticed a child who wasn't playing his position. I wanted to get his attention, but he was one of 30 new kids on the field that day. Finally, I asked someone if he knew his name. "Oh, that's One Shoe," he replied. "One Shoe," I said. "Yeah, One Shoe." I shook my head confused. Then I looked down at One Shoe's feet and noticed he was wearing one oversized black sneaker on his left foot, his kicking foot. His other foot was bare. I continued to watch One Shoe play. He didn't have a care in the world as he laughed and fooled around with the other kids. When we ended practice an hour later, One Shoe came off the field, took off his sneaker, wiped it down carefully, and put it in his backpack. He then put on his flip-flops to walk the 2 miles to his home. Before he left, he turned and said, "See you tomorrow, Coach." "See you tomorrow, One Shoe," I said to myself. That night, I put away my brand new kangaroo leather cleats, never more ashamed in my life for having them, and promised myself I wouldn't wear them until all my kids could. Very quickly, my worrying about whether I was charging enough for a latte at the cafe seemed inconsequential, particularly in the larger scheme of the daily struggles the kids and their families faced. 7 months later, I closed my cafe and filed for bankruptcy, realizing that my world was changing. That was the second time I hit rock bottom. At the age of 29, I had failed miserably by any measure. The path of the American dream was nowhere in sight. Maybe my parents were right, that there was no way that I could make it without their support. I didn't want to leave my apartment or talk to my friends because I felt I'd failed in their eyes. But I did leave to coach the kids and help them with their homework. I didn't have an excuse to give them as to why I was so miserable that I couldn't possibly be at practice, because in their eyes, there was no excuse for not wanting to play. The day the cafe closed, One Shoe's mom offered me $50 and told me if I needed to stay at their place while I found work, I could. The Fugees, which we eventually named ourselves, wasn't a typical soccer team. The kids were from war-torn countries like Bosnia, Liberia, Somalia, Sudan, and Afghanistan. One day during my first season, I was dropping a kid home when I looked over at him and noticed he was holding his stomach. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm hungry," he responded. "Don't worry about it. You'll be home soon and you'll get something to eat," thinking that he was trying to get me to pick up some fast food for him. "No, there's no food at home," he reported. I struggled to understand. There must be something. Bread, cheese. No, coach, it's that time of the month. I found out that time of the month meant the time the food stamps run out. I looked for food, but there was none. Instead, I found his mother huddled in the corner of the living room, rocking back and forth, shaking her head and muttering, "I work hard every day I work." After buying groceries and trying to draw a budget for his family and failing miserably, I realized I'd barely scratched the surface. I felt so naive and helpless. Children living less than 5 miles away from me were going to bed hungry because their parents weren't getting paid enough to make ends meet. The Fugees grew from 1 team to 2 to 3. The older siblings of the original Fugees would come and say, "Coach, we want to be a Fugees," and so we grew. Some seasons we would have cleats, others I would spend rounding up used cleats from friends and the team I had previously coached. We had a field, but some days we'd get kicked out because we didn't have permission to be there, or the gates would remain locked and we weren't allowed to enter. We didn't have space to study, so we used headlights from my car in the park or flashlights in the hallways. We received rejected uniforms that were too small or too big. And one season, we didn't have any uniforms, so we bought white T-shirts and wrote the numbers on them. We had to move fields because we couldn't afford to pay. And once we found ourselves at a field that was covered with gravel and broken glass, with guys smoking pot and drinking around the field. We spent nights on park benches. I had to make multiple trips shuttling 16 boys home from practice in my Volkswagen Beetle because there was no other way. But the boys never complained. I never had this incredible plan for what to do. The kids and their families taught me what was needed. They showed me that you can't survive on minimum wage in this country. They showed me the racism and classism in this country and how ugly it can be. And they showed me the disparity in educational opportunity. And most of all, they showed me it was far from okay. My kids were set up for failure from day one because they're put in the age-appropriate class even though they've had no formal schooling. They're expected to function without having learned the basics, to take algebra even though they can't add, to study Shakespeare when they can't read. They get passed through the system so that they won't be a burden. And for the longest time, I did nothing until the kids became my kids. Then the substandard soccer fields and the used uniforms were no longer acceptable. The lack of accountability and support in their public school was as nauseating as the sight I saw when I was 16 years old in Thailand. But unlike my 16-year-old self, I stepped in and did something. I founded an organization and a private school that would treat the kids and their families like the first-class citizens they are, that would give them the education that they were robbed of. I was recently asked what my proudest moment was. The truth is there have been so many, and it's hard to say which one it is. This one stands out, though. 6 years ago, I was working on homework with Louis, one of my Sudanese players. He kept faking a headache, getting me to read his assignments to him. This worked a couple of times, but then one day I asked him to read because I had a headache. He said he had a headache, too. This went on for quite a while, and then he looked up at me and said, "Coach, I can't read." I was floored. His progress reports showed A's and B's. He was more verbal than the rest of his teammates. How could I have missed this? The following year, I pulled Louis out of public school along with 6 of his teammates and started the Fugees Academy. At the end of his 3 years in the Fugees Academy, it was only a middle school at the time, he took the magical journey to Hogwarts by reading the Harry Potter series. And last May, Louis was the first in his family to graduate from high school, and this fall, he began his first semester at Georgia Gwinnett College. His perseverance, work ethic, and no-quit attitude is what made this possible. I love what I do. In the past 10 years, I've gone from playing a pickup soccer game in a parking lot to running the first private school dedicated to refugee education in the country. I lead an organization, run a school, and I coach. And I know it's especially important for this crowd to know we added girls to our program 3 years ago. They are a feisty, passionate, and opinionated group of girls, a perfect fit for the Agnes Scott class of 2022. True, my degree has allowed me to get to where I am, just as the degree you receive today will give you the same confidence and courage. But I could never be a talk show host because I wouldn't be able to be on the field with my kids every day at 4. I know I can never make everyone in the world have clean drinking water as my grandmother wished, but I can make sure all my Fugees do. I didn't have a plan when I began. I saw the problems these kids were facing and tried to come up with the solutions that worked. We've had many successes, but have also faced numerous obstacles. Everyone knows the problem with public education, from overcrowding to overtesting to low pay for teachers to untrained educators in the system. I'm not one who likes to talk about the problems. They are very clear. I prefer finding solutions, because while people talk, kids continue to slip through the cracks and fail. We have a solution with our organization which delivers quality education to refugees while providing a sense of belonging in a new country that can at times be very isolating. This is not a feel-good story. If you were to look at the data on refugee children, this would not be a safe investment. In fact, if you looked at that data, it would seem to guarantee failure. These kids in our school are poor, come from illiterate families, and have experienced the most traumatic effects of war. Most have never used a refrigerator and oven, been on an escalator, or sat in a classroom before arriving to the United States. They have witnessed atrocities that we read about in the newspapers. They have faced starvation, witnessed rapes, and have seen death many times over. As long as we have wars, kids will continue to need our program. If you look at our data, then this is one of the best investments out there. We have children from 39 different countries, boys and girls, Muslims and Christians, Sunnis and Shias, Buddhists and Hindus. We have kids from warring factions, kids who can't read, and kids who can't write. Kids enter our school in the 6th grade, testing on the kindergarten level, and in 3 years, 90% of them are reading between a 6th and 8th grade level. And even better than that are the intangibles, the things we cannot measure with tests, the self-confidence, the curiosity, the independence, and the critical thinking. I'd like to tell you about a student who's typical of the kids in our school. His family fled Sudan and went to Ethiopia. He lost his mother in the war, and he came to the United States at age 9. He was angry, depressed, and scared. He never went to school until he came to the US, and he couldn't speak a word of English. He is currently in our 10th grade. He loves art and business class. He is an exceptional soccer player, and he had already scored 2 goals this morning by the time I left the game. He is not a top student. Standardized tests cannot capture all that he's accomplished in the 5 years, but he has teachers that believe in him, that nurture him, and hold him accountable. He has begun to see himself the way we do. Our school attracts the kids that no one else wants, the kids that are bullied in school because of their names, their accents, or the way they look. We embrace their differences, celebrate their cultures, and bring it all together. When I came to this country in 1993, I was an idealist. I believed that the American dream was alive, and when I applied and was granted asylum in '97, I continued to believe in the possibilities that lay ahead. I chose to become a citizen because to this day, I'm still an idealist, continuing to believe in the resilience and goodness of humanity, that people will choose to do the right thing. Today, you join a sisterhood of women that only a few get to experience. The one thing I knew I had at 22 that my friends who graduated from co-ed schools didn't have. The women who I met in my 4 years at Smith are the ones I have had for life. They have been with me through thick and thin, dragging me out of bed when my parents disowned me, being supportive when I filed for bankruptcy, and telling me that I needed to wear Spanx after my appearance on CNN. They are the ones that I constantly turn to in times of trouble. They are the ones that threaten to write a tell-all after I get any recognition for my work, grounding me and reminding me that I should be grateful that we never had Facebook or Twitter in our time at college. Cherish your friends. Your shared experience the last 4 years will bond you for life. I am nearly finished. All of us here are privileged. By virtue of being here today, we are privileged. We are safe, we are not starving, we can read and we can write. We either have a college degree or several, or we'll be receiving one today. And with that comes even more privilege. With that comes the burden of responsibility. Don't live within the confines of your bubble. Imagine what it would be like to walk in another's shoes. Don't shut out your hearts and minds to the suffering in this world because it doesn't affect you personally. Identify with the powerless, not the powerful. Raise your voice on behalf of those that have no voice. And always believe that you can make this world a better, safer, kinder place. What did the fox say? Congratulations, class of 2014. Thank you.